It did happen, that's true, but it's also a pain in the neck with logistics, right? At harvest time, it's hard sending trucks different ways and shifting shifters at your own site, or having some trucks going to the site and some going home. The secret sauce is getting your economy right and using these maps to inform what you're doing next time around.
Hello and welcome back to Shared Ag Solutions by BCG. I'm Janine Batters, and today I'm really excited to be speaking with Jonathan Dyer. He is what I would say an expert in protein mapping. Welcome, Jonathan.
Hi, Janine. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for being on, Jonathan. Now, tell me first just a little bit about your farm for our listeners.
Yeah, so we're farming at Kaniva in the West Wimmera, spread out across a few blocks, continuous cropping, red wheat, durum, canola, and pulses. Mostly lentils and beans, but paddock or two a vetch in for the cleanup paddocks each year.
And so when did you start thinking about getting a protein machine?
We got our protein machine in 2016. Been thinking about it for a couple of years before that. 2014 and 15 were pretty ordinary years in this patch, so we couldn't justify it. But then everyone remembers 2016, and so that was a great year to get started with it.
So you got a protein machine. When did you start using it to make protein maps for nitrogen decisions?
That's sort of what we're doing with it now, but that's kind of exactly how it started out for us. So ever said before I was home on the farm, Dad had been we've got a lot of on-farm storage. So I've been interested in storing grain on farm and marketing it domestically instead of going through the bulk handlers. Obviously with that, hence the interest in protein, because we found some good markets for domestic high protein wheat. So we've been trying to grow high protein wheat for a pretty long time, but obviously not going to the silo 3, 4, 10 times a day, you don't get that instant feedback on your grain quality. And so we had a desk protein machine that we bought for that. But, it's harvest. No one's got time to stop and test for protein every single load. And then we don't have 3 bunker stackers set up just to go to the right one on the day. So we sort of needed some quicker feedback than that, hence the interest in the harvester protein meters.
Okay. And then what made you start thinking, we could do more with this?
Yeah, well, so it happened in 2015, right? I did the Nuffield on data collection on farm, and in 2016 we had the good season, so we got the protein meter, and beauty, we're away, right? So we did some really interesting segregation things, and that's what I spooked about, so you can segregate off farm. But I guess we worked out over time that the secret sauce is to actually use your protein maps to identify where we're over or under applying nitrogen, and then adjust your applications in the following years to compensate.
How many headers do you have?
Yeah, we run 2 machines, and we've got a protein meter on one of them, and that's all we've ever had. So it works pretty well, because especially in cereals, which is when we're mostly using the protein meter, if you're going past across the paddock, it still gets you a pretty good map of what's going on.
Okay, so you don't find that you need them on both machines?
It would be good. So we're possibly going to go that way this year. We haven't yet. It's more of an issue in canola, because you get that a bit slower, and so you can have bigger chunks missing, I guess. And we also got a contractor in to help us with canola last year, and so it was only 1 in 3 passes on average if everything was going on the same and everything was working well. So yeah, obviously the more data is the better, but for the wheat maps, if you're going pass for pass on your 2 machines, 1 in 2 is fine.
Okay, so there's a few things to consider there, isn't there? And obviously there's a cost as well.
Hence we've only had the one up until this point, but it's still, the head is the smallest thing, right? So it's only 12 meters. So even if you're going pass for pass, it's still every 24, or at the very worst sort of 36, 48 meters, and some people have boom sprays that wide, so it still gives you enough to use the following year for your nitrogen maps.
Okay, so that's good to know. So what type of protein machine do you have?
Yeah, we got the crop scan. It's one of the old ones. It was at 3000H. So that's what they had back in 2016 when we put them on. So they're an Australian company based in Sydney, and they do a whole bunch of sensors, including this one. So yeah, it's good to be able to have an Aussie product.
Good to have an Aussie product. How do you find the service?
Yeah, they've been really good. So they do now have dealers across the country. The listeners that have to check with them, depending on who that is in their patch. So they tend to be red or yellow dealers mostly, because the green ones behind me have developed their own, and so they're not against you putting one of theirs on, but they're not to sell a competing product, I suppose.
Why did you go with the crop scan over the John Deere?
Well, the John Deere one didn't exist back then, so that's only been out in the last couple of years. So back when we did it, they were the only ones around.
So you've obviously got the 2 screens. You don't have the new one with the isobus. How do you find that?
Yeah, it's good. So it's just a bit more cab clutter, I suppose. So it's just a little touch screen that sits up in the corner of the cab and just ticks away all day. So it's kind of good in a way, because that's all it does. And so if something breaks on it, you don't have to stop harvesting and check it because it's not integrated. So you can sort of keep going. And if you've got reasonable phone coverage, you can hotspot it on your phone. And so we even had tech support log in while you're still harvesting. If you have a software issue with it, they can do some stuff remotely on it. So that's been good too.
So taking a step back, I think I've dived in because I'm excited. How does a protein machine actually work?
Yeah, so the ones on the header, most people would be familiar with the ones, the NIR machines at the silos. So it's the exact same technology as that, right? So it's essentially one of them built into a header. So there's a sample head on the clean grain elevator. So it's always good fun to take to a header when you're installing it with an angle grinder, and you cut a small hole in the clean grain elevator and you mount the sample head on the side, and then there's a big optical fiber cable that runs up into the cab or wherever you mount the computer. Yeah, it's essentially one of those grain testing machines at the silo, but it's mounted on your machine, and in the cab you can then take a feed into it from your GPS receiver on your roof, and so then it samples the better your crop yields, the more samples you get, but every 15 to 30 seconds you get a new sample and you get your GPS maps as you drive across your paddock.
So you mentioned cutting in with the angle grinder, Jonathan. That sounds a bit scary. Did you have to do that, or did someone else come and do it for you?
No, they helped us. They came and helped us install it. So I think I did it under supervision. Me or my brother or someone did it under supervision.
Tell me then, you're talking about how it comes into the monitor and how it works and how you can connect up your phone via hotspot. Does that mean that you then don't have to get the USB and plug it into your monitor and then load it up to your computer to make those maps? Does it automatically connect up?
Yeah, correct. So it does do that now. So it's only been the last couple of years they've sort of brought that in. So up until pretty recently, I had been doing the USB thing, but yeah, now they have their own profile in the cloud, and it's another login and all of that. But you can log in and it backs it up too whenever you're within, like if you've got Wi-Fi back at the yard or whatever, or if you hotspot with your phone during harvesting, you can do backups that way. So yeah, it is good to not have to deal with the USBs. Yeah, having said that though, if you are in an area with poor connectivity, you still have that as an option.
Can you explain to our listeners how are you using a protein machine to create protein maps to make your decisions on nitrogen?
So once it's set up and installed, you just start it up and it just runs in the background all day, and it just sits there, and every time the chamber fills up, it takes a reading, drops it out, and then waits for the chamber to fill up again. And yeah, you end up with thousands of samples across a paddock. So it's really good resolution. And the other thing is, it varies quite a lot, right? But if you have lots of different samples, you can filter out the bad ones, and so you still get good maps.
So what happens next?
Yeah, so after harvest, the maps they're now sent up to the cloud, which is good. So I go down through and download them all and bring them into our farm management software and have a look over them, print them out. We use them with our yield maps when we do our harvest review with our agronomist, and yeah, try and learn from them.
Okay, so your agronomist does your maps, or you do your maps, or do you use a software?
Well, I make all the maps up because I can do it. There's companies around to help people out doing it. It's not everyone's as interested in this stuff as I am, but so I do it and present them to the other guys in our business and to the agronomist, and we sort of go through it in our review to try and learn from it. Okay,
so you actually make the spreadsheets up yourself?
I do, yes. So I realise that not everyone's is not as keen on that side of things. All right, so there's no spreadsheets at this point. It's just downloading the mapping, making the maps basically, and printing them out and displaying them.
And so do you know of any software? So if for example, like me, I was going to go, well, I really like to do that, Jonathan, but I'm not really keen on making the spreadsheets myself. What would you recommend?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different options. So there's SMS software, which runs locally on your computer. So you can buy that and install that, and you can do it all yourself, kind of manually, kind of the not old school way, but it's all locally on your computer, right? So you have the control of the whole process. Well, there's 2 or 3 different operators that work in the cloud now, so you can do it all online. Precision Cropping Technologies is one of them. I'm sure there's others as well that you can do it all online, and they hook up to your, My John Deere or the CNH equivalent hooks up to all the cloud services, and probably easier to do it that way, but a few different options.
So Jonathan, I was looking at one called Engage, and I was having a look at that, and that looked pretty nice.
Yeah, so Engage is the CropScan's own kind of solution that they've developed, make it simpler, I guess, and cut a few of these transferring back and forward steps out.
So in terms of you making the spreadsheets, do you have a prescription formula that you use?
Not directly. So there's a guy up in New South Wales who's Broden Holland, I think Tim mentioned him the other day, who's taking his protein maps, running a formula over them, and then using them for his nitrogen maps the next following season. So we haven't gone to that extent yet. And our rotation doesn't allow us to. So he does a long-term pasture, and then he takes out a pasture, and then he'll run a fairly heavy canola, wheat, barley rotation for 5 or 6 years. And then when the weeds take him over, he just puts it out to pasture again. So he's got those maps back to back to back. Because we're in the Wimmera, right? So we're up to like 30% pulses this year. And so we're growing a pulse nearly every second year after our wheat crop. So we don't necessarily have the continuity to be able to do that. So what we've done with it is it's helped to inform making our paddock zones. And so we're now soil testing in our different zones and then fertilizing them appropriately. Protein maps are really helpful initially in identifying where our different zones are.
Okay, so I did hear you speak at Trials Review Day, and I do follow you on Twitter or X, and you have been talking a bit about this, and I've seen Roden Holland's been talking about this as well. So I've seen some of the maps that you've been putting up, and a big question of mine was, so looking at your yield maps, looking at your protein maps, how do you know whether it's nutrition or whether there's some other limiting factor?
So they're a good spot to start, right? So they show you where there's something going on. I actually went through with the crop scan guys, and when they were developing Engage, they said, well, we're trying to get our head around this. What do we need to do? And that was the quadrant they made, right? Was low and high yield and then low and high protein. If you've got a situation where you've got low yield and low protein, well, that could be N. But if it's low yield, low protein, or it could be high yield, low protein, it still could be N. But if it's high yield, high protein, that's great. That's where we want to end up, but not too high, right? Because you can blow it off the other end too, right? And waste your money. Yeah, but if it's high protein, low yield, well, there's your clue, right? Well, it's not nitrogen. It's something else, which is what in the example I used at Birchett, well, it was frost, but exacerbated by too much nitrogen because of history of frost.
So what did you do?
That was probably the best thing about those maps is once you see the glaring differences, it just becomes obvious that you need to change because you're putting too much money on the table by not. So in combination with that and yield map and then you get the old man who sits down, like I might do a first draft of maps and then I show the old man, he said, what do you think? The soil type goes around that tree and around that dam. And so we over time develop these zones, and then we're zone farming now, getting one soil test per zone. And as our paddocks get bigger over time, those zones are sometimes the size of the original paddocks were, right? But they're not in neat squares. They follow the ground contours, soil types, whatever.
So talking about soil test, Jonathan, do you soil test all those areas that you were talking about every year?
So we do some soil testing every year, and we've been kind of increasing gradually as we go. We now are at the point where we soil test before all our cereal and canola crops. I say all the zones, but with a bit of an asterisk, like if you've got a 5 hectare piece of rubbish in the corner of some paddock, you're not going to soil test for 5 hectares. So there's always a judgment call as to how big your zones need to be before you sort of worry about them. So, but if it's sort of more than 20 or 30 hectares in one zone, we'll generally do it because it started when fertilizer prices were $1,300 a ton or whatever, right? The return on investment became, well, the soil test was now worth less, was now worth 300 kilos of urea. And so we only had to adjust our application by 300 kilos and it was worth doing it. So that year we did pretty well everything, and we found that useful and that we've sort of kept doing it. And then from that, then the nitrogen planning falls out of that. So we've got canola in those fields. Well, we decided then, well, these are the zones we're going to test this year and do all the planning. So we're testing more, not less over time because it's working. It's better than guessing.
It's getting more information to help you make decisions. Do you have a variable rate seeder?
Yes, we do. We use it a little bit, not a whole lot. Pretty much most of our nutrition, like 90+% of our nitrogen now goes out in crop. So because we're worried about speed. So used to have a dual shoot seeder, but we went away from it because it was throwing too much dirt. We were getting too much chemical damage in our crops. So we've gone back to KISS principle at seeding, keep it simple. And so we're only single shooting. So, and as we've had a good run of seasons, we're trying to keep our phosphorus rates high. And so we're putting mostly 60 kilos of MAP or equivalent out. We're worried about seed burn, right? So we're not putting any nitrogen out up front. We've mucked around with phosphorus trials and doing some variable rate high-low trials, but we're in the Wimmera, really high PBI, phosphorus buffering soils. So you get these weird results when you do phosphorus trials because your soil tests come back and say you've got heaps of it, but high PBI, so it's not available. So you still get responses when the algorithms say you shouldn't. So mucked around with that a bit a few years ago, gave up in frustration, just said it's a bit of the N bank approach, right? But it's a P bank. So we're just trying to keep our rates up. So we're now putting most of our N out in crop for better or worse.
What do you use to help you make your nitrogen decisions? Do you use your profit? Do you use the M banking?
Yeah, so we work with our agronomist, and he does have a spreadsheet. We're starting with the soil tests in sort of March, early April, just before seeding. And then we usually I did get the results back a couple of weeks ago during seeding. And so that's our base for the year. And he's got his own spreadsheet he's developed, and it's a decision support model essentially, but it's an Excel spreadsheet. But you can think of it in the same way you think of yield profit or AppSim. There's a couple other ones out there. And we're feeding information into the spreadsheet as we go, right? So rainfall as it happens through the year, and then any topdress applications we make. And so then we have water limited yield potential that we're trying to hit, and we do some scenario planning with that. So we've got a decile 3, 5, and 7 for the rest of the year. And I haven't done this one yet. The next, I'm going to have to update because we've had 2.5 months of our growing season gone past already this year. We've only had 20 mils of rain for it. So already it's going to be affecting our yield potentials at the end of the year, because it's going to average from here on out will now be like a decile 7 for the year, right? So we're going to have to look at that as we go. So it's similar to yield profit. We're targeting our water limited yield potential at the end and trying to put enough nitrogen on to get there.
How do the protein maps fit into your agronomist spreadsheet?
Well, obviously they're backwards looking, so they show us how we went. So it's feedback to see, did we overshoot the mark or undershoot the mark? Are we in the right tracks? Because of our on-farm storage thing, so half of our wheat area is durum, so that's a protein wheat market. And the way that works is sort of weird because everyone quotes durum 1 price, which is 13% protein. It's a H1 bread wheat equivalent. So we've got DR1, which is 13%, DR2, which is above 11.5, and DR3, which is above 10. And if you get below 10 with durum, there's no other classification for it. It becomes feed. So, but the reason we grow durum is because the last few years there's been quite a good price premium over it to bread wheat. So if you drop out of that bottom level, it's like the old cliff face pricing guys back in the day, but at worse. Because so if you don't hit DR3, you can drop $100, $150 a tonne just like that. It's a good incentive to get it right. It's mostly stored on farm. There's a couple of private storages that will take it, but a lot of it's grown under contract to supply the pasta mill in Adelaide, and a small amount of it exported out through SA as well. Yeah, so despite being Victorian, we're as close to Port Adelaide as we are to Portland, so we can send grain that way if we need to.
Okay, that's really cool. So going back to, you're talking about variable rate and using those protein maps, how do you make the decision on where you put the extra nitrogen? Are you saying that the areas that are high protein, low yield, you've been putting too much on? And so would you take it off those areas and put it on the other part that were yielding high, but the protein was low?
We're trying to target whatever our water limited. So that's why the soil tests at the start of the year is important, because they give us a baseline. And so we have what we started the year with. We know what we've applied in crop. And so then we know where we should be ending up in the absence of frost or disease or anything else. So some of these things happen and they affect it. But so we know because we test the poor performing part of the paddock and we test the high performing part. And so we can see straight away at the start of the year, well, is that going to be, is the high performing part chronically short on nitrogen because we've been taking more yield out of it each year? Well, if we are, boost those bits up. Whereas if the heavy black flat got frosted the year before, canola crop in it got frosted the year before, so there's heaps of N left over, well, then we can back off on that one. So it's not about cutting necessarily. It's about optimizing, putting it where it's going to be most useful.
And using those protein maps to make your zones for your soil testing.
Yeah, we're not trying to cut fertilizer use, right? We're trying to have high yields. So if this is working, over time, we're going to be using slightly more fertilizer because we're going to be growing more crop, but we're making better use of it. Getting a premium price, but it's yield too. So it all comes back, yield's king, right? We always talk about that. Bread wheat, optimum yield response, depending on which paper you read, optimum yield response is somewhere between 11 and 12% protein, right? Well, that's APW anyway. So drive past your nearest grain corp or grain flow stack and look at the ASW bunker and think to yourself, that whole stack represents yield that was left on the table.
Wow.
Exactly. The last couple of years, there's been a minimal price premium for protein, right? Except for us with the durum thing. But with the bread wheat, which is what I guess most of your listeners will be familiar with, we're still trying to maximise yield. So we aim for 11.5% bread wheat and 12 in the durum, reasons we've spoken about before. But that's what we target, right? Now, whether we get there or not usually depends on what happens in October after we've finished spreading. Are we going to get a heat wave? Is it wet? Whatever. But that's what we're aiming for. But that's the thing is, yeah, you lose a little bit falling from APW down to ASW, but you lose a lot by not using the potential that you've had.
For people that are thinking about doing this, or maybe perhaps they've already got a protein machine, what would you say the first steps are to starting to make these protein maps?
So you can make basic ones, I'm pretty sure, through Engage. So that's the crop scan solution. I'd be starting there with them. That's the easiest way to do it. For the data nerds like me, they're very good. You can download your CSV files and you manipulate them in whatever your management software is. If you want to go to that level, they're very helpful with people who want to do that. But if you want to keep it simple, start with the Engage thing. There's only 2 on the market, really. So if you want to jump on board and keep it simple within the John Deere system, you could do that too. And that's within their kind of online ecosystem. So that's another easy way to go.
So what are some of the challenges you've had with a protein machine?
Canola. So in theory, you can do oil, protein and moisture in canola and moisture and protein in all the cereals. So we've had some issues with the canola maps. But the only other issue is it's not so much the technologies, because we're all on-farm storage, right? It's calibration, getting accurate calibration samples to start with, because we don't go to the silo 5 times a day to get it checked. So you feel a bit bad running samples in there if you're not taking grain in there and taking their time and all that sort of stuff. So now they do supply you with some base level samples to get you started. But if you're having a weird season like we had last harvest with lots of weird stuff going on, like with weather damage or whatever, it's like any protein machine or any other thing, you've got to calibrate it to your conditions.
So what do you do? What would you suggest to get around that?
Talk to the people who supply it with. They will supply you with fixed samples of known values if you ask for them. So you can do that. Or when you go and run your first sample of the morning into the silo, don't tip it on the truck. Keep it and keep the docket. And then, because no one's got harvest, right? No one's got time. We're busy, got to go. Well, the next morning when you're waiting for the dew to burn off or you get a rain delay or whatever, run your sample bucket back through and calibrate it to that. And I've been talking about our on-farm storage, but even if you're going into the system, it still helps to know what you got before you leave the paddock. And you can still use, and even if you're not using it for blending or marketing purposes as such, you still want this data to help you make better decisions the following year, like we talked about before.
So you're making these maps yourself. How much time do you allocate to all this planning, Jonathan?
It took a lot of time to get all our zones set up for our paddocks, but now I have them and they're there. It's very quick. So it's hard to put a number on it. 2 or 3 days probably to get the whole farm set up and in the system. But now it's in the system and now I have it all set up. It'll take me 10 minutes to make up a variable rate urea map.
Sort of similar to when you have to GPS a new paddock or something.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, and that's a great example because the better you set it up at the start, the easier it is as you go along. So there is a certain cost to getting it all going, but in terms of the maps from year to year, it's just I do it as part of our regular planning, February, March, when you're doing your planning for the new year. It's just a part of that. So 2 or 3 days a year, it seems like a lot at the time because there's always more things you could be doing, but when you see the results at the end of the year, you're glad you did it.
And bang for your buck too, really, when you're thinking about you're going to be getting your durum weight in the criteria that you need it. So you're going to be getting paid more, but also hopefully you're getting more yield as well. And you're making sure that your urea is working for you because you're paying so much for it.
That's it. Well, that was back in the day when urea was $400 a tonne, who cares, right? But yeah, these higher fertilizer prices have been the real incentive for us to kind of go all in on this and say, actually, it is working for us. Yeah, it's not that we're spending less, it's that we're putting it where it's needed.
Smarter decisions.
Yeah.
So you said you started this 2015, 2016. Did you have a group of other farmers or where you obviously were working with CropScan? Were you working with any other farmers or any other experts? Where did you get all your information from?
I was involved with a little bit through the SPA, I guess. I was a bit involved with them at the time and also people I met through the Nuffield network. But no, mostly it was just myself. Again, because I've got a background in IT, right? So I was familiar with the tools as such. So what I just needed help with was the agronomic stuff about, what's the best way to implement it. So yeah, mostly just develop the maps, say myself, but it wasn't myself. Yeah, with input from the agronomist and, like the old man, like it all feeds in.
Okay. And I didn't know you had a background in IT. Tell me about that.
Yeah. So I studied IT at uni and was a web developer for a couple of years before coming back on the farm. So fully accept with all this stuff that I'm not a normal farmer in that sense. So I am more comfortable with these tools than others might be.
There's no such thing as a normal farmer, though, is there, Jonathan?
No, that's right. Yeah, we all have our experiences and interests we try and bring in and use.
So you said, Jonathan, you have one of the older models. I think we have the 3300, but now there's a 4000 VT isobus. Can you tell me some of the differences between how they work and where would be the best value for me to spend my money?
The answer is it depends what sort of header you have. So you can still get a crop scan if you have a green header, but you're getting the 30, was it the other one?
3300?
Yeah, you're getting one of those. If you've got a green header, you can get one of those and it works perfectly fine. It just, it's another screen in the cab. I don't know about the other green ones, the AGCO machines. I'm not sure about them, where they sit in that scheme. So the Isobus VT for the red and yellow ones, I think it works quite well. If that's not an option for you, you can get the other ones. So, or if you've got green, you've got two choices because you can have the proprietary Deer one, which, integrates nicely with the op center. And I think that's what Tim was talking about running the other day. So we've got the other way because, again, it's just kind of because that's what not stuck with, but that's what we've got. So we're happy with it. We'll probably continue with it. Heard good feedback from both. They both do a very similar thing. And I even priced them both up a couple of months ago and they're not a heap of difference in it, really. So it's all about, you go on whichever one's the best solution for you rather than price, I think, because there wasn't heaps in it.
Does it matter how old your header is?
No, there's a crop scan put a great, might have been a couple of years ago now, but they put one in a 9600 deer on a research farm in the US, and like the protein meter was worth more than the header. Yeah, it's agnostic from that point of view.
Okay. Are they something that you think will just become standard in a header, or is nothing standard in a header?
Well, I would have thought so, but no, because most headers they're corn harvesters, right? They get adapted for Australia. So it turns out that Australia is one of the only markets in the world that actually cares about protein. In a lot of the rest of the world, wheat is wheat and barley is barley and corn is corn and sorghum is sorghum, and it doesn't matter. So it's only in these markets like ours where you have these protein segregations that it's sort of more relevant to.
Okay. Where to from here?
Yeah, I'd like to keep getting more granular with it, I suppose. In a way, it's crazy that we have, I've got 3 or 4 zones in a 300 hectare paddock. Can we get any more? Yeah, so it's just trying to find these data points that we can use to help us get more nuanced as we go.
Okay. What is some of the best advice, just in general, life advice, farm advice? What is some of the best advice you've been given, Jonathan?
I learned a lot through the Nuffield process, and doing that was fantastic. But the thing that always stuck with me after that was surround yourself with people who are smarter than you, which was sort of what Nuffield was, but it's why I enjoy being involved with BCG and even X, Twitter. I'm quite active on there just because there's always people out there dealing with similar issues or have got different approaches or do things that you haven't thought of.
Is there anything else you'd like to add? Is there anything else that we haven't discussed today that you think our listeners might be interested in knowing?
I think that it is gotten easier now than it was when I first started out with it. So if you want it to be all on your phone or on the tablet, you can now do that. So there's not, we touched on it before about there's not so much manual data handling now, but it is becoming easier and more accessible. And I think not a mistake I made. It was a journey that we was on. Like when I did the Nuffield circuit, I got the protein meter and I said, wow, look at this amazing result we had with segregation, and we were able to blend away hundreds of tons of what would have been ASW wheat. If we had not had a protein meter, we just would have sent it in the bin and it would have been ASW. We were able to have one header going in the frosted high protein stuff, another one going up on the hill where the yield was good, and we're able to blend it away as sort of APW, H2, something like that. It was an amazing result. Paid for the protein meter in here. It did happen, that's true, but it's also a pain in the neck with logistics, right? At harvest time, it's hard sending trucks different ways and shifting shifters at your own site, or having some trucks going to the site and some going home. The secret sauce is getting your economy right and using these maps to inform what you're doing next time around.